So Mishnah 18 says as follows. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamaliel Omer, chapter 1, Mishnah 18, it may be 17 or 19, depending on your book. Rabbi Shimon, the son of Gamaliel, said, and again, so this is Rabbi Shimon ben Gamaliel. This Rabbi Shimon ben Gamaliel is Rabbi Shimon ben Gamaliel the second. So you had Shimon, you had Hillel, Shimon. Hillel's son was Shimon. Shimon's son was Gamaliel. Gamaliel's son was Shimon. Shimon's son was Gamaliel, and Gamaliel's son was Shimon. So, and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamaliel, who we're referencing now, is the father of Yehuda Nasi, who wrote the Mishnah. So this is Rabbi Shimon ben Gamaliel, who was executed by the Romans after the Bar Kokhba revolt. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamaliel says, and this sort of ends, since Rebbe is writing the Mishnah, so the first Mishnah is the only one that's strictly chronological. So we skip Rabbi Gamaliel Hazakan, we skip Rabbi Gamaliel the elder, who was really Rabbi Gamaliel the second, just to confuse everyone. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamaliel, Rabbi Shimon the son of Gamaliel, who was the son of Rabbi Gamaliel the Nasi, Rabbi Gamaliel lived after the construction of the temple. So he says, Al shlosha devarim ha'olam kayam. The world is sustained upon three things. There are three things that sustain the world. Al hadin, on the law, in other words, on justice. Al ha'emes, and on truth. And Va'al hashalom, and peace. So there, and Shenemar, as it says, Emes u'mishpat b'shalom, as it says in the book of Zechariah, that predicting more correctly, telling the Jewish people what they need to do to make the temporary second temple into the permanent third, which didn't happen. Emes, because we're still waiting for the third. Emes, truth, u'mishpat, and justice, shalom, and peace, shiftu b'shareichem, judge in your gates. So so this is what sustains the world. So the first question I'm going to ask you is the formulation here. In other words, the three things. Because it would seem that the entire purpose of din, of justice, the din here means carrying out the law, right? Carrying out the law. That's din. In other words, when we say if the Gemara says someone comes to din, that means you have two people with a dispute, or we have someone we want to prosecute and we bring them to din. So din means the application of the law to a situation, and the inexorable and in a sense inflexible. Shalom, emes, truth. It would seem truth is somewhat superfluous here, because any din that isn't emes is not a din. A din needs to be emet. By definition, any judgment that we make, any rule that we make, any law that we make, any application law we make that doesn't follow truth is useless. So the question is, how does emes stand on its own? And last of all, shalom, and peace you shall, and peace. The world is sustained by peace. The problem is that the maximum of peace is achieved by the minimum of din. In other words, the way that you maintain at least temporarily peace is by not telling anyone what to do, and not finding one person guilty and one person innocent, one person liable and one person in credit, because that's not peace. In other words, the peace is, it would seem, is where everyone gets along. The maximum of din, granted, if there's no din, people get away with murder, but if there is din, but if too much din, you don't get shalom. So shalom and din are, I wouldn't say they're 180 degrees from each other, but they're about, probably 120 degrees from each other. In other words, if you think about it, shalom and din, in other words, a compromise, as we know, has more shalom but less din. It's less right. And certainly, the emes, the truth, is not necessarily conducive to shalom. And the proof is that halachically, those who came to the JLI program know that halachically, the places which you're allowed to change the truth, the places where you're allowed to say things that are factually untrue, is typically speaking where you're not harming the third party but does enhance peace. If it's 4 minutes to go to a wedding and your wife asks you, do I look good in this dress? You're going to say yes, and that may not be true, but you're going to say yes because that's necessary for peace. And the same thing as someone, bought a house, you're going to ooh and ah over it, even if maybe they paid too much, and it's, in your opinion as an architect, it's not such a nice house. Because at this point, there's no reversing. So the point is, and by the same token, if someone says, did so-and-so say this about me? Did my husband or wife say this about me? You're allowed to lie where you're going to preserve the peace, and it's not something that's a crucial need to know. Did my husband say that that he's about to go live as a hermit in the Amazon jungle? Well, that's a need to know basis. But if did my husband say that he found me to be a nag? You're better off not saying that, even if he said that, because it's permitted to change for the sake of peace. So the point is that emes and din both seem to be somewhat in opposition to shalom. And conversely, emes and din themselves, the real question is, since a din that is not emet is not worthwhile, why have it at all? And granted that you need all these things, but din and shalom, or emes and shalom, which is shalom emes is some shalom and emes is peace and truth is something that appears several times in Tanakh without din, right? And more than that, if you look at the proof text, what's the proof text? Emesh mishpat shalom shiftu b'shareichem. So you have this idea of mishpat, of judgment. So we know din here means judgment, and not something else. So my question is, why is emet included here? And how can one conceivably, how do I put it? You can't have the maximum of both. So, go ahead.
Well, din and emet are often in conflict because the law is concerned often with the well-being of society, and in extreme cases, that isn't necessarily emet as far as the particular litigants. There are works of literature like, Billy Budd by Melville, where the captain is faced with the destruction of the system versus finding guilty an innocent man, which preserves the system but does an injustice.
Right, but halachically that may not be an option.
Perhaps not, but in terms of, there are laws, even a Jewish law that the court makes because it's offense of some sort, or it's it's not true in an abstract sense that we have to say the Shema by midnight, but the law is going to hold that way a priori, so that might
prevent a problem.
So, right, so even offense might be considered in opposition to emet.
Okay. So, and by the same token,
it's the needs of the
the
society.
same token, Maimonides says that a person who's convicted and he knows it's untrue, nevertheless should pay because the Torah demands he pays. So the Torah may demand that you fulfill a din that didn't follow emet. That being said, we see
or Rabbi Joshua having to not carry a stick on Yom Kippur.
Even though as we see it today, he was right. So that's it. That's a possibility. So that emet and din are not precisely the same, but din has a value because it keeps everything in order.
Or
also
Shavuos is a great example. What day really was it? Some questions can be decided even if not answered.
There's another possibility, by the way. So that's a very good point. So really, what you have here is you have a continuum. In other words, so according to what you're saying, Jordan, one can argue there's a continuum here. In other words, you have shalom at one end and emet at the other. Shalom is harmony in essence at all costs. Emet is the truth, and emet at all costs, and perhaps din, conceivably, din is the thing that mediates between those two. as it says, emesh mishpat u'shalom, that in the verse you put mishpat there, whereas Rabbi Shimon Gamaliel puts din first, because he's talking about what sustains the world, and clearly it's neither emet or shalom without din. So din is perhaps the method by which we mediate between the two. So you have and it's like a triangle. In other words, emet. In other words, there's three flavors, three colors. It's like three dimensions. Emet is one dimension, shalom is another, and din is another. In other words, din is the truth of a formal system. Emet is the truth of in the concrete, in essence. Actually, I would say that din is truth in the abstract. Emet is truth in the concrete, and shalom is peace. Which is in the concrete, because in the abstract you don't need peace, right? Peace is where you're harmonizing things that are different. In the abstract, in theory, there are no contradictions. The contradictions are in the real world. So that's an excellent approach. There is another approach also that isn't contradictory to this, but another way of looking at this, which is that if you look at this concept of aladin, ala emes, aladin, vala emet, vala shalom, that there are many different kinds of din. So the ideal din is one that includes emet and shalom together, and that means that the halacha gives the dayan, he gives the judge the opportunity to make a compromise before you go to the court with the evidence. And according to, there's a debate on this in Tractate Sanhedrin, but the opinion that we follow is that a court should always demand that people make a pshara, that they compromise, that they mediate between themselves, and only if the compromise fails do we then go and judge. So conceivably he's saying that the world is sustained not by conflict and strict justice, but by using the tools of justice to mediate between truth and peace. Because there's no one is completely happy with a pshara, but then is with a compromise, nor is a compromise completely true. But there is some truth in the compromise, and there's certainly some harmony in the compromise. That's a second possibility. There's a third possibility. That din is the divine truth. In other words, din is what is true to God, because there are many things in the Torah that are not necessary by our understanding of what is true or necessary. Not only there are chukim, are there laws that we don't understand, there are elements of laws that we don't understand. So din is the law of the Torah, which may go beyond what we experience as truth. Then there's truth, which is what we experience as truth, and that's two things. Truth is a very broad term, but in this context, truth means two things. It means veracity, reality, and truth also means what we see as being necessary for society to exist. Because truth only exists between two people. If there's one person in the world, there's no issue of truth per se, in the sense we're using it. There's mathematical truth and logical truth. But when we're talking about truth, which is sort of those things that truth means, that in Hebrew is about unchangeability. So what are the unchangeable qualities we need? So from a human perspective, whether a rabbit is kosher or not is not a fundamental quality we need. It is once God asks it of us. But things like fairness, like helping each other, like not stealing, even things like belief in God, even the need to commemorate the important events in our life, and personally and nationally, something like blessings, prayer. These are all things that are part of our truth. So we say the world stands on three things. Din, in other words, God's conception of what's necessary. Emet, the human conception of what's necessary. And shalom, and peace, which is the ability to harmonize between different people who have different senses of necessity or how to express that necessity, right? We all want people to have what they need, but there are many debates politically and economically and how we get there, right? So Shalom is to harmonize between the possible ways of getting there. And Din is our understanding of what God wants from us, which may go beyond our sense of emet. So now I would raise the question to you, since Din includes God's truth, and God's truth includes all the human truths that are true. Therefore the Torah says don't kill, don't steal, don't overcharge, and so on. Once again, I come back to the question in the other way. If Din represents the divine truth, who needs emet, the human truth?
We cannot avoid it. We're humans.
Yeah, but why do we say the world is sustained by it? The world is sustained by God's truth. It includes all the human truth.
It's not easy to separate God's truth from humans. But, who's the judge?
I understand, but the point is then just look at the din. Look at what the Torah says, and some make sense and some doesn't. Why is emet standing on its own?
Well, but human motivation based on perception of, the illusory reality is not, is what the humans make it. I mean, we don't have access to Hashem's truth. We have.
But there are things that, on the whole, most people will see to be true.
Right, but everybody's living in their own self-created illusion based on
Well, that's why you need din.
self-perception.
So if emet is the human perception of truth, why is that important once I have a Torah to tell me what God's truth is?
Because the Torah says 5% of what you can do is prohibited and 5% is required, and the other 90% is controlled by human truth, by the perception of right and wrong that is within the scope of Torah, of din, but not mandated.
Right. So din includes the things the Torah commands me to do and not to do.
Right.
But 90% of my life are things that the Torah permits. And as the Ramban says, one could very quickly become a menuval, a despicable person who's constantly engaged in fulfilling their appetites, even within the context of the Torah. So truth now, and your idea of multiple truths fits into this idea very well, because the din is the din. There are debates in din, right? But the law is the law. That's it. The halacha is the halacha, once you establish what the halacha is. But what is the appropriate use of the voluntary life? In other words, should I spend another hour in the office? Should I do this or that with my life? How much luxuries do I really need? In other words, all the things that are permitted by the Torah, but the Torah challenges us to know God in all your ways. Is this necessary? Is this a luxury? Is this, good for my health or bad for my health? These are all things the Torah leaves a choice up to us. It just tells us, and those questions, the ability to live the voluntary parts of your life. In other words, the reshut, in other words, the parts of your life that belong to you in an effective and godly way. In other words, am I really relaxing, or am I just lazing around? Do I really need this recreational time, or ought I not to learn Torah or help someone else? So those questions as to how, and is this aggressive business, or does it border on the dishonest, even if the Torah doesn't prohibit it? So in all those questions, you do have to look at truth, and it's different. In other words, the person who has an easier time of it ought to spend more time learning Torah. You can't demand the same of someone who has a harder time. Some people, the Gemara talks about a some people genuinely need, shall we say, very refined surroundings. Another person, it's an affectation and is a waste of time, because, you really don't, you really can handle a little bit of dirt on your food, and so on and so forth. So that model where emet is the human truth, attempting to find the truth of, and that's unique to each person. What's the truth of what Hashem wants from me? Well, it depends on my abilities, my talents, my knowledge, my nature, and so on. So that is another possibility. The Bar Tanura has a very interesting approach. The Bar Tanura says that essentially these are really, Bar Tanura's whole approach to Pirke Avot in general is that we're talking to the Dayanim, we're talking to the judges, we're talking to the leaders of the community. So he says the world is sustained by three things. He says Aladin. Aladin means to say that, correct and fair justice. Ala emet, on truth, which is that people tell the truth. And see, on the technical level, justice is simply saying that if we accept the testimony of A, if A's testimony stands up in court, so then the law is going to be in favor of B or C. But you don't know if A lied. We have no way of knowing that ultimately. So the first is that to judge according to the evidence in front of you. The second is that people not lie, so they don't create false evidence that the judge is stuck with using because he doesn't know, he's not God. So last of all, he says shalom is the idea of peace between people. So what that means is that the impetus to lie is a product of the fact that people are not whole with each other. I have an impetus to lie because I feel that if I tell you the truth, you're going to get something that I don't want you to have, and so on. So the other way of looking at it is that these three things are all part of having a correct outcome in court. Din is judging properly, knowing the law, judging properly. Emet is that, as they say in computer language, garbage in, garbage out, right? So if you're not getting the right input, the right information, you're going to do the right operations, it doesn't help. If people are lying to the Beit Din and we can't discover they're lying, the Beit Din's decision is worthless. And last of all, peace. The impetus, peace means wholeness. It's not just peace, lack of conflict, it's wholeness. If people are whole with each other, in other words, if they're not conflicted with each other, they have no impetus to lie. The impetus to lie comes where there's no peace, and therefore I cannot bear that you have something, and so on, therefore I lie about it. So this is the Bar Tanura. It's the simplest, but it's also an approach. Now Bar Tanura also says that one of the possibilities is that it's talking about peace between nations. And this brings us to the question of here he's saying something much deeper, and then I'll pause for questions. In the second version of the Bar Tanura, when he says peace between nations, so he's making a very interesting point, which is that din, law, varies from nation to nation. Emet, truth might not vary, but even if you establish what the reality is, you still have to know what to do with it, and that's different from nation to nation. And last of all, shalom, which is the peace between nations, is the only way to deal with this. In other words, if peace is a value in itself, you'll figure out how to deal with your different laws and your different, the weights you give to different truths. Right? In other words, if you're going to start talking, if you're going to start talking, say about economic systems, so a Frenchman will say, everyone has health care and everyone has 6 weeks of vacation. The American will say, you have 12% unemployment, typically that's the range for the last 40 years. 10% of those people are very, very long term and don't seem to have any chance of getting a job, and most people are stuck in little apartments that they're never going to get out of. And I think that people should have an opportunity to be employed, they should have an opportunity to make something, there's an opportunity to get a big house. Now, those are both not bad ideas, but they're different truths, the old stereotype is true. Your typical Frenchman would rather have security and equity. Your typical American, within reason, would rather have opportunity and flexibility. At least that's, what's been the case since the war. Those are different ways of looking at the truth. But if you want a world where there's peace, you're going to have to find ways of coordinating various laws and coordinating various responses to realities, to statistics as they are. So first you have din. First you have the law. That if the law is applied properly, you have a good society. Then you have the question of emet, of truth, which means, in this case, according to the Bar Chanura's second version, in my opinion of the Bar Chanura, it means how you weight different truths, which are different from nation to nation. And last of all, you have shalom, you have peace, which means we find a way to compromise about these things. So the world stands on three things: a commitment to truth as you see it, a commitment to justice as you apply it, but a commitment to shalom, which means that you're somehow going to have to get all these various systems to work together, and that's on the global level. So that's a fourth way of looking at this particular text. We still haven't answered, but I'll take your comments. The question is, remember at the beginning we said the world stands on three things: Torah, prayer, temple service, and acts of kindness, and here we say the world is sustained. So the next question we should talk about is the difference between standing and sustaining. But I believe you had a comment? You had a comment you wanted to make earlier? No?
No, I just said it's free will to your question.
What?
It's a free will. This is what I said before to your question.
Uh-huh.
Why is it the met and the din?
Right. Okay.
When you first brought up the Bartanuer's position, it occurs to me there's another possible meaning for shalom and emet, which is shalom can also be you're at peace with yourself and who you are, and a lot of the lies we tell are are sort of when we're not comfortable with that, and that can pervert justice also. So whether we're fooling ourselves or whether we're lying to a court or lying to someone else, if a vain person in the old days shows up at court without glasses on and is a witness to something, that's like a withholding of evidence. Not motivated by a lack of peace between people, but a lack of peace between a person and themselves. The same thing can be applied to nations, because we all have, every nation has lies it believes about itself. It has its own vision of itself, which is usually self-deception in many ways. And that also perverts justice.
Excellent. So now there's an interesting. So in other words,
So
to a certain
shalom
extent,
is comfort within yourself.
right? Which might mean a look at what you thought was emes and you thought was din, maybe adjust them.
Right. We all have things that that we are rightfully or wrongly proud of, true or not, and we all have things that we are rightly, wrongfully full of shame, true or not, deservedly or not, and the self-perception is not real.
And as an individual, so with nations.
Yeah.
Very nice. There, as far as olam and omed, so when the world stands on something, it means that's what keeps the world in existence. So Torah and Chasadim, since the world exists in Emera, if not for Torah and Mitzvot, there would be no world. But even if you come to a point in history, like say, during the times of the really bad kings of Judea, where only a few dozen people are keeping Torah and Mitzvot, that's enough. Even a few people keeping Torah and Mitzvot is enough to keep the world going, right? Till Abraham, God lets the world exist by kindness after Abraham. But how many people are there? There's Abraham, there's Isaac, there's Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel. There's not so many people doing the right thing. So Omed, the world to exist for Torah and Mitzvahs, if there's 10 people, 3 people doing it, that's enough. But Kayam, so it's Torah Avodim doesn't say, but now, and Torah Avodim Chasadim are individual things. You can study Torah, you can pray, and you can engage in deeds of kindness and mitzvot. But these things are institutional. Din is institutional. You need a just system. Emet is in a sense institutional because truth has to be pervasive. There has to be a system of truth between people. And shalom is institutional by definition because shalom only exists when there's peace between people in a community and peace between communities and peace between nations. So Lubavitcher Rebbe says that one is individual virtue, the other is institutional virtue. So he says that so individual virtue can do omed, can keep the world going, but kayam, which means the world should be sustained in a way that it's a good world, that it's a optimal world, rather than a world that exists because God can't destroy it because there's some good deeds going on. That's only possible when the institutions are healthy. And therefore there has to be din between people, and emet, however you define it, between people, and shalom between people. The society needs to be a peaceful society. The society needs to be a society that values truth. The society needs to be a society of laws and the laws that are applied. As everyone here knows, Soviet Union had a fantastic constitution. But because there was no institutional way of making it happen, you have a problem. Everyone had for complete freedom of speech, right? But there was no way, there was no constitutional court to express it in. So the Rebbe argues that kayam sustained, which means to say that the world is a good and settled and, how do we put it, civilized place, is only possible where the societies embrace truth and societies embrace peace and societies embrace sort of, justice, which means that the law is the same for everyone. So the idea is the law is the same for everyone, and in essence, reality there has to be elements of reality that are the same for everyone. And what's shalom, peace, is ultimately about the other person as valuable as you, so people have to have equal value. So there has to be equality of law, equality of value between people, and in between them, there has to be some kind of equality of defining your terms, defining your reality, which is emet. So the world can exist in the merit of a few, but the world is sustained, which means to say kayam means sustained and stands, and in its optimal way is only possible when you have societal virtue. And what are the societal virtues? Again, Torah mitzvot are ultimately individual things, but justice, truth, and peace are only possible in the context of society as a whole. I can get along with someone, I can have peace with someone. It's not true shalom is where a society is at peace. True emet is where we all have a shared version of reality and commit to it. And true law doesn't depend on who you are and where you're from. It's always the same for everyone. So that's the distinction between the beginning of this chapter and the end. That one is talking about the fact that every one of us has the capacity to make a huge difference to the world by our mitzvot. The other is that we can't rest on making that difference, but that the world is not truly developed and it's not truly whole, and certainly not optimal until we somehow take the responsibility for others and for society. And by the way, it's interesting to note that the word omeid, to stand, indicates, the world stands on it. In other words, it indicates stasis, something passive the world stands on. But kayam, sustaining, is active. Because you can be who you are, and that's all good and fine. But to create a situation where a society works in a certain way, that demands constant activity. So those are some of the ideas that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamaliel wants us to think about. Historically, obviously, he saw the collapse of the first rebellion, the first Commonwealth, the second Commonwealth because of dissension and a lack of these things. He saw the collapse of the Bar Kokhba revolt because of that. And he saw a Roman Empire that had very different truths for Roman citizens and not Roman citizens and so on and so forth. So Shimon Gamaliel lived in a world where both among the Jews and the non-Jews there was a complete lack of these qualities. And therefore the world was in turmoil. So he says the way out of this turmoil is the way the world stands, and the kayam, the way the world is sustained, is by abandoning this turmoil for some kind of overarching system that everyone, as if it were, buys into. Now, it's very interesting. It's very interesting that it says shareichem, it says your gates. So we should take a look at the context of the verse as a whole. So let me just have my Tanakh here, please. Where did my Tanakh go?
Rabbi, can I ask you something?
Sure, please.
I'm still trying to understand this whole thing, and I'm not quite sure I get it. You talk about that different nations understand truth and justice in their own different ways. And this is of course true, but there clearly are situations in this world when some nations are right and other nations are wrong. In particular because they stand on a totally different development levels, right?
Right, or
So how would you
or like the Nazis, they've embraced some really bad idea that is fundamentally untrue.
Right. So I don't.
Well, that's
see
where din comes in.
what's the-
That's where din. Din sometimes demands harsh measures. In other words, din comes in. What you can allow for a certain emphasis on various truths. Reality is reality, but you can allow for as long as people are committed to truth, even if some people are really into truth A and other people into truth B, you can still have shalom, you can still have harmony. Obviously, where your truth both excludes another truth and is wrong, well then you need din, then you need to put those people into line, then you need to stop them. That's why din is not taken out. In other words, there's a certain amount of shall we say, emphasis on emet. Again, like one society wants to have a lot of opportunity, and another society wants to have a lot of security. That's fine.
Right, but Nazis is a different example because these people indeed embrace their own theory. But how to deal with in our case with wild tribes that come to New York and live as if they
Well, the answer is again, that's where din comes in. That we do believe that there's a certain level of emes that's irrefutable. In other words, you may emphasize emes or not, and shalom isn't worth it at all costs. That's where din comes in.
Well, they wouldn't understand it.
They don't have to understand it. In other words, you have the obligation to make society look a certain way. Explain it to them later. But the fact is, you have what they can understand is that we won't tolerate this behavior. It's like when the British abolished the custom of burning the widow alive on the funeral pyre of high caste Indians. So this is like late 18th century. So a delegation of Indian princes came to Napier, who was the British Governor General, or actually the East India Company before the British took it over, right? So what happens? So they say, look, this is our custom, this is our religion, this is our practice. We've been doing it for years and years, you really can't ask us to stop it. He says, that's fine. He says, we have a custom too. Our custom is that every time you burn a woman alive, we erect a gallows next to the pyre and we hang all the people involved. That's our custom. You do yours, we do ours. And the point of course is that there does have to be an objective truth. There can be a different understanding. Shalom demands accepting that there's a different understanding of certain truths, but there are things. We know certain things through the Torah, the 7 Noahide laws to be true, and sometimes you have to crack down. So the fact that you don't understand and don't accept it is irrelevant to me. If I know something is true, if I know that I possess emes and you at all don't, then din is there. Where where the spread and the understanding of MS is such that it can be encompassed by shalom, you don't use din. Sometimes you use din to deal with the MS problem, and sometimes you use shalom to deal with the MS problem.
And then again, I just say one last thing, and then I shall.
I want to say, like this. So, so there was well, there was an attempt to get people into the workforce that historically haven't been in the workforce. So there's a big problem getting people to show up on time. I mean, this is before, modern electronics. So, this was when there was a big attempt back when the American car industry was very big. It was a successful attempt. I mean, to bring a lot of minorities into the auto workforce. In Detroit, in the early '60s, and in the end, one of the managers found the solution to the problem. People had grown up in a society where time just didn't mean a great deal because they were underemployed, and and things moved. So what he did was he ordered a few gross of alarm clocks, and he showed everyone how to tell time, and he gave everyone an alarm clock, and the attendance improved drastically. It's just a matter of introducing people, to a concept that they could relate to. But sometimes, you need to have people. I mean, it really depends.
So, are you willing are you saying that at some point we may want to sacrifice the whole small and underdeveloped nations for the sake of our understanding of justice?
No, it means that if we become responsible for them, or they come and live with us, or whatever it is, that we can't allow what we believe to be cruel and untrue. The Mexican, if the Eskimos, kill all their, leave their elderly outside to die. Well, now that they live in societies where there's a social safety net, and the Canadian government, will fly them food if they're starving in the winter. They don't need to leave their elderly out on the ice floes anymore. If they do, it's murder and it's wrong.
Right.
If you never took responsibility for them, that's a separate question.
The example that I have in mind is that some nations leave the utmost law for certain nations is the law of bloody revenge, right? So you forbid that, and they will still do that. So you punish them, and eventually you kill off all the male population. That's very, very real situation.
Well, I first is a question of deterrence and so on, but at the same time, when we talk about emes, mishpat, and shalom, the question is which problems are yours and which problems are God's. That's also part of shalom. The din, it may be true the din is to stop everyone who does this, but maybe shalom says that it's not your problem this week. You have bigger problems. That's why these three things need to go together. When emes gets stretched too much, you either have to use shalom and you have to use din. But generally speaking, you prefer to use shalom than to use din. There's a point where you have to deal with it, so you deal with it. The point is that you're not going to create a perfect world tomorrow. So therefore, you need to balance between them. That's there are competing goods, and you're not going to have until Mashiach comes all the goods and all the time and all the places. And that's why he says the world is sustained by three things, right? And if it's sustained by three things, that means that you're going to have to give up some of one to get the other, and vice versa. Shimon Gamaliel is telling you that the Torah understands that we live in an imperfect world, and it's our job to most express Hashem's will in an imperfect world, not to attempt to perfect it and then fail. Here it is. Plus test. Right, so he says that he talks about the restoration of the land of Israel, and he says the way to get there is, speak truth, judge fair, and judge in peace in your gates. And a gate, of course, encompasses the city. The gate indicates the society as a whole, not individuals. Okay.
So, in situations where the law supports inequity or inequality, and peace may perpetuate that situation, or peace cannot be maintained when, would you say, MS comes into play, let's say, the US
Well,
Civil
didn't.
War?
What?
The US Civil War, for example.
Well, din comes into play. You know, in other words, where the cost of shalom is the complete abandonment of emes. In other words, in the context of this last part of the discussion, I would say that when he says on three things the world sustains, it means you have to have three and not two. So yes, you have to compromise, but if the price of shalom is a complete negation of emes, then you have to apply din. If the price of din is a complete negation of shalom, well, then they got to back off on the din. If the price of emes is the negation of shalom, or the negation of din because you feel that since you in court you can't ever get complete truth, you're not going to deal with it at all. Because din and emet, we said before, are not exactly the same thing. Then you can't look for absolute pure emes. If you need all three, and if you push one, it's like the sliders, if you push one slider all the way to the right, the other two go all the way to the left. They're interrelated. So you have to have them all somewhere in the middle. Now, the second Mishnah, the second chapter, which will conclude with the first Mishnah of the second chapter, Rebbe says, Ezu derech yeshara sheyaver lo ha'adam. What is a straight path for a person to choose? Now this, of course, is Rebbe, the author of the Mishnah, so we're still continuing this order of generations. Kol shi tiferes lo seh, but tiferes lo liyadam. That is an honor that is beautiful to the doer, and is also seen as beautiful from other people. So let's look at this very first line. What does that mean? Should we do things that make you feel good? Well, sometimes things that make you feel good are not such a good path. You're going to have the acclaim of people. People acclaim all kinds of wrong things, as we know, as people just mentioned. So the answer is, Ezu derech sheyavel. What is the path a person should choose? You don't have the right to choose any path you want. They all have to be in the context of the Torah. You have no right to choose a path that's not in the context of the Torah. So how should you choose a path within the Torah? The one she tiferes lo seh, that is beautiful to the one doing it. In other words, within the context of what the Torah permits, you should choose what enthuses you, what excites you, what is beautiful to you, what you enjoy, and what speaks to you. Because all of our souls, as the Kabbalah explains, have slightly different roots. So within the context of what Torah permits, you should choose the path that most works for you. But also she tiferes lo min ha'adam. You choose the path that is seen as beautiful by others, where people say, oh, it's nice this person keeps Torah. This benefits me. This is nice. So if you have a path, if you choose a path that makes you feel real good, but involves you being really harsh or intolerant or ignoring others because you're very into not being influenced badly, so you have nothing to do with anyone who isn't perfect, you have a path which demands incredible discipline, and therefore you seek to impose a discipline on everyone else, or just makes you an unpleasant person to be with. If you choose a path where you rebuke yourself, maybe that's fine, but not so you should rebuke others. So within the context of the Torah, choose a path that works for you, provided, that's the slider thing again, provided it doesn't make others recoil, that others, in other words, there are two things in any path you choose in Torah, within the permitted paths. You need to choose and live the path in a way that makes you feel enthused and you feel excited, and in a way that other people makes them feel good about your Yiddishkeit, about your Judaism. If your Judaism and its application make them feel bad, that's no good. And on the other hand, if you behave in a way that makes all the people you feel bad, you feel good. You fulfill their expectations, but you're not into it and it doesn't enthuse you, that's also no good. So Rebbe is saying, what path should you choose within the context of the permitted paths to choose? It has to, again, be this balance. He's taking his father's global balance and bringing it within the person. What is that balance? It has to work for you, but it has to have your living, your Yiddishkeit, has to have a positive impact on others in that they are also enthused by Judaism the way you live it. And that's Tiferes, because beauty, is about harmony. Beauty is explained in many books, Jewish philosophy is about harmonizing. One note is not beautiful, many notes harmonized are beautiful. One color is not beautiful, many colors are beautiful. Obviously, the sages didn't spend a lot of time in MoMA, and that's fine. But you have paintings that are just a single splotch of one color. That being said, I'm sure there's some harmony and contrast there because that's what people cue into. And may even be the contrast with your expectations. But I'm not an art expert, but the point is that Tiferes is about harmonizing, contrasting things. A, and B, beauty means beauty is something that you draw from something else. So in other words, you should draw a sense of personal happiness and beauty from your Yiddishkeit, and others should draw a sense of happiness and peace. And if they don't, and so Rebbe's also telling us, yes, sometimes you have to be harsh and so on, but on the whole, if on the whole people aren't feeling good about the way you live your Judaism, you're doing something wrong. And if you're miserable in your Yiddishkeit, you're also doing something wrong. And that's Rebbe's point. That it's not enough to choose a path in Judaism that is correct. You have to choose a path that has Tiferes, that has beauty and harmony in it too. And min ha'adam from the people means to say anyone, Jewish, not Jewish. Everyone should be able to say that. That this person is a better person, and I feel better being around them, and I trust them, and so on, because they keep the Torah. Because Tiferes is a radiance. Tiferes is something that beauty is something that affects at a distance.
Sounds great.
Well, the issue is of course its application. And in order to do that application, you sort of need to keep Rebbe's father's statement in mind, which is the idea of balancing the various qualities. Because it's easy to focus on one, and that's that. But that's not what the Torah wants. The Torah wants you to balance things in such a way that you're never going to get perfection in any one of them. But the perfection lies in the balance itself. The perfection lies in the fact that you're able to care enough about God and other people, and that you're able to go out of yourself in order to make that balance. And that's in itself the value, the fact that you're able to transcend yourself even in holy things. Move from there. Okay. So very good Shabbos, everyone. And we will see you in a few weeks with God's help.